Okay, so welcome everybody to today's session on what North American companies can expect from business growth in the UK in 2021. So whether it's breakfast time on the West Coast, lunchtime on the East Coast, or coming up to dinner in the UK, wherever you're watching this from, I hope that you get you'll find that this is a good use of the next hour of your time. So after, in a minute, I will give you the key findings from our investment report. So we recently completed a North American investment in UK report, with which I'll share the key findings. I'm going to help set the scene for our main event. Iain Wright, the Director of Business Industrial Strategy at the ICAEW. And then after Ian's presentation on the latest business confidence monitor findings, he will join three of my colleagues: Steve Asher, Global Mobility; Dinah Patmore, one of our HR consultants; and Paul Winterflood, one of our corporate finance partners, to just discuss what the context of government intervention in the UK and the latest business confidence findings will mean for North American companies investing in the UK. So before I go into Ian's presentation, Sean, could you move on to the next slide, please? Oh, sorry, Sean, can you go back a slide, please? Sorry. There we go. So in terms of the foreign direct investment, what we have seen from doing some analysis is that foreign direct investment over from 2017 to 2018 into 2019 and 2020 is that we've had a bit of a V-shaped curve. So it dropped significantly from 17-18 to 18-19, and we have seen a bit of a pickup in 19-20. Where that will end up for 2021, we don't know. But interestingly, Sean, if you could go on to the next slide, please. For the actual M&A activity, we've seen a more consistent upward trend where there was a dip in 2016 when the UK had its referendum to leave the European Union, which created a bit of instability and uncertainty. And what we found is that for the 9 months to the end of September 2020, it looks like the outturn for 2020 will mirror that of 2016. And so hopefully with Ian's insights in a moment, we're going to see whether 2021 will see a pickup in activity similar to what 2017 did compared with 2016. Could you go on to the next slide, please, Sean? In terms of sector analysis, what we found is that the information technology in the tech sector has been an increasing share of the deals overall. We've also seen growth in financial services and healthcare, but sectors such as energy have actually reduced. Now, whether that continues will be interesting to see. Sean, could you go on to the next slide, please? And then this one will show that whilst the volume of deals into UK companies show consistent trends, actually the value of deals into UK businesses is very variable. And this tends to be because you've got one or two significant deals into specific industries each year with no particular pattern. that actually distort the outcomes. So typically for the market that we are involved in, the volume of deals, I think, is a better underlying trend of activity. Sian, could you go on to the, no, that's it, thank you. Right, okay, so before I hand over to Iain, I just wanted to help set the scene and add a bit of context for Iain's insights. So North America is the largest investor into the UK by country, or by USA and Canada together are the largest investors in the UK and have been for a number of years. You can see that the number of deals and the sectors within which the deals happen by volume are pretty consistent. And so aside from 2016, when there was a dip, there has been a consistent growth. In terms of our energy, in terms of energy, given that the US government and both the UK government have talked about a green agenda, part of which will be renewable energies, it'll be interesting to see whether energy starts to come back as a more dominant sector. In terms of government spending, 2020 has been an unprecedented year, and the UK government has met COVID with unprecedented levels of support. The International Monetary Fund described the UK government's intervention as one of the best examples of coordinated action globally. So the government intervention in 2020 in the UK has comprised largely grants for paying wages or grants to self-employed to replace earned income. Businesses, or in certain sectors like retail, have had grants to pay for property taxes. The UK government has provided trade credit guarantees for trade within the UK, and the government, to help businesses with its cash flow, has allowed them to defer some tax payments and has provided various different types of loans to businesses. As we go forward from now to the end of March, most of that support should finish. Looking beyond this date, the UK government spending is expected to continue. In its spending review last month, it stated that its day-to-day spending will increase at its fastest rate for 40 years. And as if this wasn't enough, the government intends to spend another 100 billion on capital investment, primarily in infrastructure and green energy as part of its political national levelling up agenda. This capital investment is expected to focus on green transport, amongst other commitments to reduce our carbon footprint here in the UK. Primarily, when you look at the amount of government intervention and the size of the government intervention, it's all predicated on whether this is a U or a V-shaped recovery. And hopefully, when you hear what Iain Wright has to say in terms of what the latest business confidence monitor is showing, we'll see whether the UK's hopes and expectations will happen. Now, before I hand over to Iain, we've got 3 questions which I'd appreciate you to answer, including the panelists. And the first of these 3 questions we're going to ask at the end to see if anybody's opinion has changed because of what they've heard. Sian, could you put the first? Okay, so the first question is, do you think North American investment into the UK will grow in 2021 over 2020? If you please answer. Okay, we'll give that a few more seconds. Sian, are you able to? Okay, so I think there is likely, hopefully I can remember that for the end. Okay, second question. What do you think will be the UK's biggest challenge in attracting investment from North America in 2021? So do you think the biggest challenge will be a lack of business confidence, a skills shortage, changes in regulation, or prioritising the domestic market in North America? Okay, we'll give that a few minutes. There we go. Oh, pretty split between low confidence, changes in regulation, and prioritising domestic market. Okay, very good. Not much the UK can do about the last one. And then lastly, what do you think will be the biggest opportunity in the UK that will attract investment from North America in 2021? Do you think it will be business opportunity, which could also mean access to investment capital, access to talent, the ease of doing business here in the UK, or growth opportunities outside of the domestic market? Okay, growth opportunities outside of domestic market. Very interesting. Business opportunity as well. Very good. Okay, excellent. Right, well, I think that has helped set the scene. So now I'm delighted to hand over to Iain, who will provide insights into the latest business confidence monitor. Thank you. Iain?
Darren, many thanks. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm here to present the key findings from ICAW's Business Confidence Monitoring. ICAW stands for the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. We've got about 158,000 chartered accountant members all around the world, but predominantly in the UK. I'm a chartered accountant myself. Prior to joining ICAW, I used to be a member of Parliament in Westminster. And the reason I mention that is because this business confidence monitoring exercise has been running in excess of 20 years. And when I was a member of Parliament, I found it incredibly useful and insightful. I always used to concentrate on economic and business matters when I was in the House of Commons. And what I always found is that longevity, that ability to be able to show that long-term trend and the really quite uncanny parallels and correlation between what business confidence is saying now and what that might mean for future GDP growth in the next quarter or two, that is a very close correlation. So I think it does provide really good historical perspective and a good insight into what might happen in 2021, 2022. Let me just give you some degree of background. We have just faced, as a global economy, the biggest shock to the world economy in modern economic times. Certainly in the Western developed world, in the European element, it's the biggest economic shock for something like 300 and 350 years. We've never seen anything like this since before the Industrial Revolution. And the impact of that will be felt for decades to come. The shocks and repercussions of the public health tragedy and the economic consequences will fill the next decade at least in terms of having to come to terms with it. I think as it hit the UK in March and as the UK economy lockdown, there was a sense that if we put the economy on ice, there is nothing fundamentally wrong or changing as a result of COVID. So in 6 weeks' time after March, sometime in April or May, we will be able to take the UK economy out of the freezer, thaw it out, and all the fundamentals will stay the same. It hasn't worked like that. And therefore, in response to Darren's point about a V-shaped recovery, where you have a very sharp cessation of economic activity and then a very quick bounce back, we are not going to see that. By the very nature, the long-term effect, we have been in some degree of economic crisis for 9 or 10 months. That is bound to have not just economic impacts, but psychological impacts in terms of business confidence and the appetite for investment. So, as I said, business confidence tends to show a very clear indicator about what will happen in the future, as well as what's going on now. And the latest insights from our most recent business confidence monitoring exercise, which was published last week, shows a general business confidence of -19. Now, that number doesn't mean anything to anybody in just an isolation like that. Let me give you some sort of context. During the 2008 global financial crash, at the depths of confidence showed a rating of -45. Now, what is interesting for me, again, as somebody who's always looked for a long time about what BCM is showing, is actually -19 is not so bad. Now, I think it's important to recognise when the field work for the BCM was taken. It was taken between July and October. And if you think about what was happening, we'd come out of that strict lockdown in the UK and to some extent Europe. We were tentatively emerging back to some degree of normality, but actually then a second wave came and we started to come back. So I don't think if Darren mentioned things about V-shapes, about U-shapes, I think what the data and evidence is showing us is that we will not see any of those shapes as the trajectory of economic recovery. We're going to be more akin to something like a Nike swoosh, where you'll see some sharp fall, some degree of bounce back, but then a bit of a faltering return over the next 2 years or so. We will probably return to some degree of where we were in the first quarter of 2020, something like in 2022, 2023. Now, I want to mention a couple of things. I want to mention highlights about where that economic problem is. I want to mention about sectors. I want to mention about regions in the UK, and then I want to mention, as Darren mentioned, about government policy. Let me start with what the business challenges facing UK businesses are. So we asked during the Business Confidence Monitor, what are the big issues affecting you? Now, in the main, it tends to be regulatory issues. Businesses are concerned about red tape that might be stifling their ability for enterprise, for growth. Now, what it is twofold. It's consumer demand and it's late payments. And what that seems to suggest to me is that the level of activity and the subsequent level of cash in the economy is a matter of concern for UK businesses. Demand has fallen. That is both domestic sales and exports, and indeed with exports, that has gone into actual negative territory for the first time since the BCM started, something like 20 years ago. With regards to domestic sales, it's fallen sharply and is deeper than it was during the global financial crash of 2008, 2009. And as a result of that, it's not too surprising to suggest that profits, both profits this year and expected profits next year, have fallen as well. Over the lifetime of BCM, businesses have expected profits to rise by about 4% year on year. What will happen this year is that profits will fall in absolute terms by 2% and will only grow by 2% in the next, or is expected to grow by 2% in the next 12 months. So you're seeing subdued activity as a result of that. I mentioned domestic sales. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is the level of savings ratio in the UK. This is basically the amount of proportion of a household income that is being saved by that household. Now, there always needs to be a level of saving. You need to plan for retirement. You need to prepare for a rainy day. You need some degree of a cash cushion in order to mitigate against those bad days. We historically don't save enough in this country as a household. We don't prepare enough for our retirement. We don't prepare enough so that people are exposed. They move from paycheck to paycheck. But what's really interesting is in the last quarter, our Office for National Statistics shows a savings ratio, bearing in mind that the historic, since records began, the savings ratio tends to be 6%. The savings ratio for the last quarter is 29.1. That has never been seen to those levels since records began in this country. And I think that tells you two things. One is nobody's got any money to spend outside in terms of the economy is shut down. You're not allowed to go to a bar. You're not allowed to go to a restaurant unless, really restricted. You are probably not commuting to work if you work in an office environment. There is nothing to spend your money on, and therefore people are saving. But there's also another aspect of that, which is I think people are preparing for a level of higher unemployment as the government schemes, such as Darren mentioned, come to an end in round about March or April time, and are thinking, if there is rising unemployment, I just want to be prepared for the moment. I do think, if I'm honest, that it's about the ability to spend rather than trying to save for a rainy day. And I'll come back onto that, because I think what that demonstrates, that as we see a rollout of a vaccination programme, as we see some degree of normality return in 2021, probably by Q2, you've got that untapped reservoir of cash savings that I think households will want to spend. Now, that might have inflationary consequences, but actually, I do think the UK economy will see a big boost in customer demand in the second quarter of 2021. It'll be interesting to see how that feeds into business opportunities. So I would bear that in mind. I want to also talk about sectoral performance, because it has not been a homogenous view. Again, if people know the UK, know what's happened, it won't come too much of a surprise that those sectors that have seen real falls, both in confidence, but also in terms of demand, in terms of sales, in terms of exports, and actually in terms of employment, have been construction, commercial property, manufacturing, and retail. And again, that's not a surprise given that how the economy locked down. However, if you're in IT and communications, if you're in business, finance, and insurance, and actually contrary to what Darren was saying, if you're in energy and water, essentially the utilities industries, you've done very well. And actually sales have improved, and that makes sense, as the ability to work from home, the ability to need some good IT systems and infrastructure around you, and actually the ability to keep the lights on as we work from home, that has been powering the economy forward and will continue to do so. So when you look at sentiment for 2021, business, financial and professional services, and IT and communications are expecting higher growth, higher employment prospects, and higher levels of confidence. I think that's a useful thing to know. Linked to some extent with this has been the varying regional economic performance. We're quite an unusual country in that we are, for a modern developed industrial economy or post-industrial economy, we are very concentrated in London and the Southeast. London in particular has powered the UK economy forward for the last 30 or 40 years. That brings enormous opportunities, but actually I used to be a member of Parliament in the northeast of England, where the Industrial Revolution started, close to Newcastle upon Tyne. And it's a case of, actually, we want to see economic opportunities in the north as well as in London and the southeast. As I said, although London powers the economy. What is really striking about this business confidence monitoring has been, as I mentioned at the start, confidence is -19. London has a confidence rating of -28. It is more subdued. It sees fewer opportunities than the rest of the country. The southeast of England is slightly better than the national picture. And I think that's a consequence of different factors. One is the London economy relies upon that passing trade, you know, the importance of hospitality, going into pubs and bars, taking advantage of the great cultural opportunities, and also relies very much upon London's reputation as a hub for international travel. That level of global mobility and the ability to fly in and out predominantly of Heathrow has been lost over the last 9 months. And as a result of that, there are subdued feelings about confidence. To some degree of relative contrast, the Southeast has very, very strong areas of sectoral excellence. Tech, IT, has something called the M4 corridor. So you will see the Maidenheads, the Basingstokes of this world that have got some fantastic IT clusters. They are still needed. Linked in with that, people are working from home. Economic activity hasn't died, but people have displaced where they are working. And as a result, you've seen varying sectoral and regional economic performance. Darren, I want to finish on what I think is some degree of optimism. The last time we went through something like this was in the aftermath of 2008, 2009. And the government of the day then decided that a cutting of public expenditure, the austerity programme, would be the means by which we got back on our feet. That didn't work, actually. And as a result, we've had subdued economic growth for the past decade or so. You know, it cut off capital investment, it cut off R&D responsibilities and opportunities. I think what this government has recognised is austerity Mark II will not work. And Darren, you mentioned about the plan for something like £1 of government is going to stimulate and tap in latent custody that I mentioned. Policies that I would want to mention are the so-called levelling up agenda. How do you make sure that the north of the country takes advantage of enormous economic potential, so that the northeast, Manchester, to some extent Birmingham, can really flourish and fly? I think one of the real priorities of this government is the net zero target. So this country wants to be a decarbonised net zero economy by 2030. That's only a decade away. And I think government working in conjunction with investors to try and decarbonise our economy provides enormous opportunities through transport, as Darren said, but also in terms of our infrastructure, in terms of our estates, accommodation, and in terms of making sure that we can be as decarbonised as possible. And the other thing I want to mention is government has pledged a massive increase, something like £16 billion on defence. And one of the key factors for our country is our strengths in aerospace, defence, space and security. Now, of course, civil aerospace has taken a massive knock at the moment, but actually defence has stayed fairly robust. And I think the move for government policy from soldiers on the ground, armed personnel, towards things like autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence and cybersecurity for good, respectable, reliable allies that we see in North America, as opposed to certain other nations, is going to provide enormous opportunities. There will be an expansion, quite a substantial expansion and quite a historic expansion of public expenditure to take account of this and to get the economy back on track. But we can afford to do that because of low interest rates. We can afford to stimulate the economy to build back better, in the government's phrase, and to make sure that the huge potential in the UK economy will be tapped into. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, what I want to say is this has been a strange, unprecedented year. There has been damage cause to the global economy and the UK economy, you know, some that's open, our borders are open, is not going to be immune from that. But actually, we've got enormous potential all over this country, and the UK is open for business.
Fabulous. Very good. Thank you, Iain. So what we'll do now is I'm just going to hand over to our three panelists to do a brief introduction, and then our three panelists together with Iain, I've got a few questions to ask to start debate, and then if anybody wants to ask any questions, if you could please type in the text chat any questions that you have. Then we'll do that, and then we'll have the final repeat of the poll question with regards to North American investment in the UK, and then we'll call that a day. So thank you very much. I'll hand over first of all to Paul, because you're the largest on my screen.
Thanks, Darren. Afternoon, everyone. So I'm Paul Winterflood, one of the partners in the MKS corporate finance team. As a corporate finance team, we specialise in M&A, both M&A transactions and also investments. So M&A transactions both on the buy side and on the sell side, and then investments into companies both equity and debt. Personally, I specialise in the marketing services and tech sectors. Although as a team we're sector agnostic. Certainly the marketing services and tech sectors, I'd say that they're two of the strongest and sectors in terms of being transaction volume, where there's a North American counterparty. I'd probably estimate around 20% of my transactions involves an investor in the US or a buyer or seller in the US. In terms of, I think just a brief overview in terms of what 2020 looked like from the market. Darren showed the number of deal volumes previously. I think certainly what we've seen, and I took a look at some data from the US as well, from a significant number of transactions in January and February. I think as a team we had our busiest month ever in February. The market hit bottom in May, and it's been recovering ever since. And I think that's reflected on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think deal volume is probably about 50% of where it's up to. So hopefully that gives a brief overview as to the sorts of things we do, in my opinion.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, Dinah, would you like to introduce yourself? Take yourself off mute.
Hi, I'm Dinah Patmore, Strategic HR Partner at Moore Kingston Smith HR Consultancy. I work in a small team, and we work with clients in many different sectors, supporting them with their HR and employment law needs, as you'd expect. As far as helping North American companies setting up in the UK, we have supported many over the years, mainly with ensuring compliance with UK employment law. So making sure employment contracts and policies are in place, that they have and that they work for the specific business, as well as providing access to our team for advice and guidance on specific issues. In addition to compliance, we've also helped with things like salary and benefits benchmarking, best practice around recruitment, that kind of thing. In terms of what we're involved in with our North American clients moving into 2021, I've been receiving a fair few queries around employee wellbeing, as you'd expect. There is a general feeling that 2021 may be the year we see mental health issues soar across the globe due to the impact of the pandemic. This has actually been predicted by the World Health Organization, which makes it look quite likely, really, unfortunately. So we're certainly expecting mental health and wellbeing in general to be a key theme in the UK and obviously globally into 2021, and something we're expecting anyone employing people in the UK to keep an eye on next year, and those that have a wellbeing strategy in place to be prepared for that, so much the better.
Fabulous. Thank you, Dinah. And last but definitely not least, Steve, would you like to do a bit of an introduction and overview?
Yeah, thanks, Darren. So I'm Director of Global Mobility at Moore Kingston Smith. And really echoing what Iain said in his great introduction there was that this has been a strange and unprecedented year, particularly for global mobility, because it focuses on helping businesses move their people internationally, and that's not been happening by any stretch of the imagination to the same extent that it has in previous years. So what we focus on a great deal in conversations at the moment, particularly with businesses from North America looking to at what we're doing, is how do they make strategic decisions about moving people under uncertainty more confidently. So this means we sort of look at cross-border employment structures, helping them understand the profile of the country or the region that they're going to move people into, because it's a bit of a moving target, and we can wake up on the breakfast TV and everything's changed again. If you're planning to bring people into the UK, how on earth do you keep on top of that? There's a lot of, initially during COVID, there's a lot of advice around the regulatory issues relating to tax and social security, particularly as it was difficult to anticipate some of the impact where people had to move people or keep people in a location in a way they hadn't planned to. And it's also impacted, and it's beginning to impact more and more on the way in which people look at international reward planning. So if we link that to a bit of a brief overview, first of all, there's still the enduring fundamentals of moving people. If you move someone here, that you've still got to think about the UK North American payroll obligations for the UK entity and a North American entity. You'll still need to think about the employment law practices and the differences in leave, paid time off and dismissals. And as Dinah was saying, there's an increasing focus on duty of care issues. So that's changing in attitudes to health and safety concerns. But it's not just the employer that has health and safety concerns. It's also increasingly people who are working internationally are having the same worries and concerns. So we try to work with businesses to say, how do we help you put together a new approach to this? So there's lots of reassessment of ways of deploying people internationally. There's lots of looking at new playbooks to make sure that businesses can be more flexible and adapt more quickly to different changing scenarios. These were lessons that were learned during COVID to date, where people didn't have those things in place to be able to respond quickly. And we've also seen a new approach to candidate selection emerging as well, to try and make sure the right people are being prepared to move. And finally, I guess the thing I'd say is, because of the different ways people are working nowadays, as people mentioned earlier with the hybrid and the remote working, there's an emerging issue around data protection, which during the first part of COVID was one of the last things on the list, but it's becoming more and more important as more and more business, particularly in the financial services sectors, are starting to say, is my data being managed securely alongside the health and well-being issues? So I think that, Darren, that's all I wanted to say as a brief overview.
Very good, thank you very much. So this is a pretty compact hour with a lot of information. So I think my first question is going to probably be more directed at you, Steve, as you finished off. So when we've done our analysis, it's the fire and direct investment seems to be more variable year on year versus M&A. And just picking up on your last point of the hybrid working arrangements and remote working, how is that going to impact on whether North American businesses decide to hire locally here in the UK versus bringing somebody over on secondment, whether that's to expand operations, manage operations, or to potentially set up new operations?
Yeah, I think it's about confidence and expectations, Darren. Expectations of employees is, I think, increasingly that they will be able to work in a hybrid way. That is partly from a non-office location and partly in an office or a work arrangement. And it's also about confidence. I think if you're asking people to move in a traditional way, which would have been come to the UK from North America for 18 months to 2 or 3 years, that's a big ask in the current environment. You're asking people to walk away from family maybe, or if you're asking them to bring the family with them, that's quite a large psychological thing to get your head around, and businesses are thinking, how are we going to do that? And I think they will need to think about that in the next 2 or 3 years increasingly. And I think the issue around different ways of working is also requires people to be a bit more imaginative, a bit more innovative. Generally we would have brought highly skilled people into the UK to do something that couldn't be done here. I mean, increasingly that may not be the way we look at it. We may in future take the work to where the skills are, which it may well be that creates a whole different way of looking at things. But fundamentally, I think the issue businesses are going to have is to be very, very careful about how they select which individuals will be deployed from the North American business into the UK. I think you've got issues around how do you identify the right person. We'd be having to look at things that are difficult, particularly from an HR perspective, the age of somebody, their underlying health conditions, their psychological profile, and being able to handle the uncertainty of working remotely. And that means we're going to have to be rather more careful and a bit more sophisticated than some are in how you select the candidates for being deployed. Does that help?
Yeah, very useful. So Dinah, just picking up on what Steve was saying there around some of the sort of implications and the potential complete flip of taking work to employees rather than moving employees to the work. What sort of implications can you see from sort of the specific UK HR side of it?
Thanks, Darren. I guess just around contractual issues, I guess, would be the first thing I'd think of. I'm not really sure, I'll be honest. It's something that, Steve, you've mentioned today, and as much as I was thinking earlier about there might well be skill shortages in the UK in certain industries, you saying that just now in terms of work moving over to where the skills are because of the fact that we can work remotely is actually really, really good and valid point. So, you know, I'm not totally sure off the top of my head, I'll be honest.
Okay, no, that's fine. Iain, just in terms of sort of the business confidence and the insights with regards to this hybrid model, what sort of underlying implications are there of this sort of hybrid model coming out in the monitor and sort of implications for the UK?
I'd mention three things, Darren. I'd mention an intergenerational difference in experience in terms of very much building upon what Dinah was having to say. So if I think about my own team, you know, you might be thinking the same in your practice. The older people who might be commuting in from say Surrey to London are thinking, I never want to go back to the old arrangements. I don't have to commute. This is great. I can work from home. I've got the space and I get more of my life back. My younger members of the team think this is dreadful. I might be sharing a crowded flat with flatmates. I've got no way of getting out. I'm not learning the skills that I need in a workplace environment. And I think there's a real difference in the mental health and well-being approach of different generations. That's my first point. Second point is a lot of our pensions are based upon commercial property and those long-term yields. What are the values of those now? My pension will be very much invested into central London office accommodation. What does that mean? And it's a case of, I think we will have to revive and revitalize what cities look like, because that brings me on to the other point, which is, you know, what does a sort of hybrid model where you might be, and I'm thinking very much about, you know, business, finance and professional services here, Darren. You know, if you're in manufacturing, if you're a nurse or in healthcare, you know, you don't have the luxury of remote working. You know, you need to go to the shop floor or whatever. But if you're in our environment and you want to work from home 2 or 3 days, what does that mean about the multiplier effect about the sandwich shops, about the pubs, about the cultural environment that we see in our cities. Now, does that mean that other towns will benefit? Does that mean that it's not going to be the city centres, it's going to be the strong local businesses and market towns? So that cluster effect, the agglomeration, is dissipated, and that will have, will we see a revival of market towns? I don't think this is yet to be played out, but I think there will be profound consequences that will be long-term, Darren, in terms of the economy and the investment patterns as well.
Very helpful, very helpful. Okay, I'm going to move the conversation on. There's a question that's come up into the chat, which thank you, Michael, which is a subtle variation on one of the questions I was going to ask for you, Paul. So 2020 has led to lower profits across a number of businesses. Contrast that with, there is obviously a lot of speculation around specifically the capital gains regime changing, and so therefore there are a number of business owners which collectively across the practice we are talking to who are looking at selling, but clearly the timing with regards to profits is not at such a good time to sell. So you've got conflicting pressures for selling and not selling. How do you see that playing out with regards to M&A activity, one, from a domestic perspective, and secondly, from North American buyers, investors? And may perhaps contextualise that, given you said the bottom of the market was around May, whether there's sort of any recent trends that we're seeing.
I think firstly, it's in terms of the bottom of the market. The bottom of the market was in terms of the bottom of the broad market. I think one thing that's been I can't remember the exact phrase that's been used in the media, but there's a very asymmetrical recovery in place. There are some sectors which are performing exceptionally strongly, like e-commerce, for instance, tech-enabled businesses and services. That's been that sector has performed exceptionally well. Then in terms of B2B businesses, it then depends on which vertical your clients are in. So I think we're, in terms of profit levels in 2020, I think we're going to, I think what we're seeing as we're coming to the end of it is there's a big variety in profitability. Now, in terms of a decision from an entrepreneur about whether to sell their business, there's clearly a bit of a trade-off here. So if you're thinking, well, if your 2020s may not have been the year you'd hoped it would have been, then ordinarily you would probably say, okay, I need to get 2021 under my belt before I can start thinking about selling my business. But there's been a lot in the press in the UK about the changes to capital gains tax. With some people looking to potentially try and sell their businesses in advance of the end of the tax year at the end of April. Now, there's quite a lag on selling businesses, so people do need to. Business owners are quite justifiably moving quite quickly and taking advice on this. Now, I think from a domestic versus North American basis, I think from a North American acquirer perspective, I think if I'm looking to acquire in the UK, I think and you're looking to make an acquisition first of all, then it probably is a good time to be approaching UK businesses to see if they would be looking to sell. Clearly, it would depend on the response is likely to depend on how what the impact of COVID has been. But in terms of the tax situation and the tax climate, UK-based businesses may be more likely to sell at the moment because of the changes coming down the tracks. I think in terms of Michael's question about sort of buy domestic sentiment, I think one thing, particularly when we're operating on when we're acting on the sell side, I think it's we find it particularly in the Marcom space. If you're maybe looking to sell your business, it tends to more often than not be to a UK acquirer. The caveat of that is that if you've got a US partner already, or a North American partner, and you already know them, then it tends to be building on initial relationships in people's businesses. I think in more sort of technical areas where they're building into a new market, then I think it'd be driven by what the sentiment is in North America. And I think generally there's in both directions, from the US to the UK and from the UK to the US, it's typically a pretty common first move from an M&A perspective to go across the Atlantic.
Okay, thank you. Dinah, a question for you. Vaccines are quite topical at the moment, and obviously we've mentioned well-being as well. What's this going to mean for UK employers trying to help ensure that they can sort of get back to normal as quickly as possible? And I appreciate that that there is the UK at large, and then there are businesses individually. How do you see that evolving in 2021?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we're seeing the first vaccinations being rolled out in the UK today. So, yes, it is very topical. But at the moment, the UK government doesn't have any legal power to make vaccinations mandatory. And indeed, Boris has clearly stated that this isn't really how we do things in the UK. So, if the government did make vaccinations mandatory, which is looking unlikely, employers could follow suit and make vaccinations a condition of employment. You could easily see, sectors like retail and hospitality wanting to be really keen to put the advert out there to say all of our staff are vaccinated, COVID-19 vaccinated. However, as it stands at the moment, employers could face challenges from employees if they try and impose vaccinations. There could be claims of constructive unfair dismissal if the employee's refusal is to do with a health and safety concern, for example. There could be claims under the Equality Act if the employee has a reason for not wanting to be vaccinated that's connected to a protected characteristic, for example. So looking at discrimination, essentially. Even if an employer doesn't compel employees to get vaccinated, but states that employees can't return to the workplace, for example, unless they have a vaccination, the same risks might still apply at the moment as it stands of constructive unfair dismissal and potential discrimination claims. So really, until we have further guidance from the government, what we're saying is employers should probably tackle COVID vaccinations the same as they currently do for flu vaccinations. So that's essentially giving employees information about that, being open about that information, giving them the choice to be vaccinated should they want to. Obviously, flu vaccinations at the moment, a lot of the time employers cover the cost of this. So we know that COVID vaccines are not available to purchase privately at the moment. And given the issues around supply and storage and things like that, it might be a very long time before we see any kind of employer-led vaccination schemes going on. So yeah, just information, encouragement would be the best way to deal with this at the moment, because we really just need to watch this space, I think.
Sure. So I'm going to bring Iain back in here, because one of the comments that you made when you were talking, Iain, is about how much business confidence bouncing back is predicated on the vaccines coming out. So clearly, if companies cannot help support a rollout like they can flu vaccines. Any comments to make around the government being solely responsible for deploying the vaccine and getting business confidence back up?
I think government will want to prioritise according to key target demographics, age profiles, what have you. Diana's absolutely right. I don't think, I'm not a government spokesperson, and I'm certainly not, speaking on behalf of this or have any insider knowledge, but I don't think there is any chance that there will be mandatory vaccination. It's just against all of our sense of civil liberties. It's up to you. You look at the facts, you decide. I think, we will see a lot of return to normality in the spring as the vaccination is rolled out. But I think that, frankly, the psychological impacts will last a long time. People may have the vaccine, but do they want to be on a crowded train commuting into the centre of London? That will take a longer time than a rollout of a vaccination programme to address. And I think HR professionals will need to have that sense of communication about well-being, about reassurance, in order to deal with those psychological risks that people have. Some people have been working from home and will have been up to about a year. And it will be difficult to put your first foot back on that tube train or train to commute into London. So having to deal with that will be big. It will be a big issue. And I don't think, the vaccination is such a welcome step. We've had such good news about this over the last week or so, but it's not a magic wand, and it will not be instant, and there will be some longer term effects that HR professionals, the whole economy will have to deal with.
Interesting. Well, I think we could probably carry on going on for hours, but the hour is up. So I just want to wrap up that in summary, it sounds to me like innovation, agile thinking looks like the way forward. The scale of the challenges that we've been presented with are going to carry over into 2021 for quite some time. But like I always say, one person's problem is another person's opportunity. And so it'll be interesting to see what new business models, what new innovation comes out of this. And I know for all of the challenges, there is a lot of optimism of, well, actually, we can make things work in a different way. So it'll be interesting to see that change will come up. So I'm just going to wrap up by asking everyone to, Sian, can you put the question up once more, just to see if we get a similar response to what we did earlier on. Do you think North American investment into the UK will grow in 2021 over 2020? So do people feel the same as they did at the start, less confident or more confident? Okay, Sian, given we're short on time, we won't give people such a long time to our here. So that looks very similar, perhaps slightly more positive than before. We'll have to compare to that. So, okay, great. Thank you. Listen, just leaves me to say thank you to Iain, to Steve, Dinah, Paul, and to Sian. And hopefully everybody found that useful. And we will hopefully be in contact soon. Many thanks.
Bye.
Bye.